Chers internautes, chers membres de la communauté de l'assurance, bonsoir. Bonsoir Marc.
Bonsoir Sandrine. C'est avec un immense plaisir que je vous accueille ce soir en direct de Luxembourg pour une séance académique de l'ACA Insurance Day 2020, le monde d'après, en édition entièrement virtuelle.
Et c'est déjà la 8e édition de l'ACA Insurance Day ce soir.
Oui, et c'est bien la première fois que je ne porte pas de cravate pour l'occasion. Et c'est également la première fois que nous commençons à 5 heures et ce, directement au bar.
Prost Marc. Tout ça à cause d'un virus minuscule mais terriblement liberticide.
Oui, depuis mars dernier, nos modes de vie et de travail ont cassé les codes. Alors, pour cette édition, nous avons souhaité vous proposer un programme qui met l'humain avant tout.
Avec d'abord une interview exclusive du directeur du Commissariat aux assurances, Claude Wirion, interview que j'aurai l'honneur de mener.
Ensuite, Pierre Gramegna, notre ministre des Finances, fidèle à toutes les éditions de l'ACA Insurance Day depuis 2013, discutera au coin du feu avec Marc Lauer, le président de l'ACA.
Tout de suite après, nous vous emmènerons au cœur du leadership avec un speaker inspirant, c'est
Fons Trompenaars sur le sujet « Leading from the front, reconciling strategic dilemmas ».
Tout un programme. Mais avant de nous lancer dans ce programme, et ceux qui nous ont suivis les 3 premiers webinaires le savent, voici les quelques règles pratiques à suivre pour une séance académique 100% digitale et interactive. Les interventions qui suivent seront en français et en anglais et seront traduites simultanément en anglais et en français. Alors, vous avez la possibilité, comme la régie est en train de nous le montrer, de cliquer sur l'icône en forme de casque qui se trouve en bas à droite de votre écran, pour choisir la langue de votre événement. Vous pouvez également changer la langue à tout moment et n'hésitez pas tout simplement à nous suivre dans la langue du plateau sans traduction.
Vous le savez, vous pouvez interagir avec nous pendant toute la soirée en utilisant le chat de la plateforme. Interagissez entre vous et avec nous. L'équipe de l'ACA est aussi comme vous derrière l'écran et profitez-en. Vous trouverez également une helpline pour les problèmes techniques. Contact us.
Et comme vous l'avez peut-être vu, Quentin is online. Nous sommes aussi curieux de votre opinion et nous vous invitons à participer aux sondages qui auront lieu tout au long de cette soirée. Et d'ailleurs, tout de suite, un premier sondage, comme vous pouvez le voir sur votre écran, une question qui s'affiche. Avec les petits fours, vous prendrez plutôt du champagne, une bière ou un mocktail? Et Marc, c'est quoi un mocktail?
Mais un cocktail sans alcool.
Bravo Marc. Alors, indiquez votre préférence et n'oubliez pas de valider votre réponse parce que c'est le dernier clic qui fera la différence.
Voilà, je constate qu'une écrasante majorité d'entre vous préfère le champagne. Rassurez-vous, nous en aurons assez en cave pour l'année prochaine. Voilà, nous sommes prêts.
Alors Marc, à présent, retour sur une année 2020 définitivement pas comme les autres.
Non, car depuis le vendredi 13 mars, plus rien n'est comme avant. Notre vie, notre travail, tout a changé. J'ai même appris de nouveaux mots comme confinement, distanciation sociale, gestes barrières, déconfinement, la Covid, présentiel et j'en passe.
Nous sommes aussi devenus des spécialistes de plateformes digitales. Et en très peu de temps, nous avons tout testé à l'ACA.
Oui, très vite, avec mes collègues, nous nous sommes également posé la question, mais qu'est-ce qu'on va faire pour l'ACA Insurance Day 2020? Comment remplace-t-on le networking alors que les rencontres en grand nombre sont impossibles, sinon même interdites? Est-ce qu'on postpose ou est-ce qu'on annule tout?
Et finalement, on n'a choisi ni l'un ni l'autre. Un autre choix restait possible, celui de s'adapter et de réinventer le format de l'ACA Insurance Day.
Et donc, avec ma formidable équipe, nous avons repensé le concept de l'ACA Insurance Day pour vous offrir un format à 100% digital avec ni plus ni moins 8 heures de programme réparties sur 4 jours en novembre. Vous êtes plus de 1000 personnes à vous être inscrits et plus de 900 à être connectés lors de chaque webinaire le 9, le 12 et le 19 novembre.
Alors merci à vous. Et puis ces webinaires sont d'ailleurs tous accessibles en replay sur le site. Marc, avant tout ça, comment as-tu vécu les premiers jours du confinement?
Mais je revenais juste de Suède. C'était très dur, rapide et, soyons honnêtes, peu préparé. Nous avons équipé toute l'équipe de l'ACA avec des ordinateurs et des téléphones portables en un temps record. J'ai également dû repenser les contacts avec nos membres et annuler tous les voyages planifiés. Léa Zanda et Valérie Tollet venaient de nous rejoindre et leur intégration dans l'équipe a été différente. La fermeture des écoles a été le deuxième coup dur à encaisser par l'équipe. Et toi, Sandrine, qui as un contact très régulier avec les membres, comment as-tu perçu la situation ?
Oui, ce que j'ai vu, ce sont des directeurs d'entreprises d'assurance qui se sont comportés en héros. Et oui, le mot n'est pas assez fort. Leur premier souci a été de mettre en sécurité leurs collaborateurs et de maintenir un service de qualité au service des clients. Clients qui, eux aussi, ont été frappés par la crise et dont les attentes ont changé du jour au lendemain.
Et pourtant, les assureurs et réassureurs ont été qualifiés de non éligibles au chômage partiel. En revanche, une sévère crise boursière est arrivée dans l'ombre du virus et a bien fait souffrir nos membres.
Du côté de notre équipe, nous avons cherché et trouvé une organisation à distance qui soit efficace et conviviale. Et Teams est apparu dans notre quotidien et nous permet aujourd'hui encore d'organiser toutes nos réunions avec nos membres. Bon, il y a aussi des côtés sympas. On a découvert les fonds d'écran colorés, des œuvres d'art parfois, ou encore fait connaissance avec les enfants ou les chiens, les chats des uns et des autres. L'année 2020 est aussi marquée par des changements importants dans la communauté de l'assurance.
Oui, depuis mai dernier, l'ACA a un nouveau président, Marc Lauer, sur le plateau dans un instant. Et le 1er janvier prochain, Claude Wirion mettra un terme à sa remarquable carrière au commissariat aux assurances. Je profite d'ailleurs de l'occasion pour souhaiter la bienvenue à son successeur, Thierry Flamand.
Thierry, préparez-vous à l'édition 2021 de l'ACA Insurance Day.
Et oui. Et je tiens également à saluer ici Annick Felt, ancien membre du comité de direction du commissariat aux assurances, et Valérie Skepers, nouveau membre du comité de direction du commissariat aux assurances.
La communauté de l'ACA s'est encore agrandie en 2020. Nous avons accueilli 7 membres associés à l'ACA. Alors bienvenue et merci à Taleo Consulting, CMS Luxembourg, 99 Advisory, Polygon International, Foretix, Initio et Cetrel Securities Worldline.
Alors Sandrine, dans cette crise, comment vont les affaires de nos membres cette année ?
Alors Marc, tu avais osé un pronostic ici même l'année dernière, c'est-à-dire 40 milliards d'euros d'encaissement de primes pour tout le secteur de l'assurance pour l'exercice 2019. Et en effet, le secteur a fait 40 milliards en 2019. Alors Marc, je te retourne la question pour 2020. Quel est ton pronostic ?
Mais malheureusement, les perspectives sont différentes en 2020. Fin troisième trimestre, le commissariat aux assurances annonçait une baisse de 20% par rapport à la même époque de 2019, soit un plus de 7% pour l'assurance non-vie, mais de moins 33% pour l'assurance vie. Je prévois donc environ 30 milliards de primes en assurance directe pour 2020, soit 10 milliards de moins ou 25% de moins. Mais Sandrine, les grands sujets de l'ACA, qu'est-ce que tu traites pour le moment ?
Alors je ne suis pas seule, nous sommes toute une équipe et nous traitons le sujet de la RSE, la responsabilité sociale des entreprises, sur 2 volets. D'abord sur l'état de préparation de nos membres et suite à notre enquête, vous êtes 96% à vouloir que l'ACA soit active sur le sujet. Et ensuite, les évolutions réglementaires qui seront au centre de nos activités. Nous nous préparons également ensemble avec nos membres à la visite du GAFI. Et la crise a malheureusement fait rebondir les solutions de repli un peu partout dans le monde et en Europe.
Oui, qui aurait en effet cru que les frontières se fermeraient si vite, avec même des douaniers armés sur le pont de Schengen. Schengen, le symbole de la liberté de mouvement des personnes en Europe.
Et cette liberté, c'est un principe fondateur de l'Union européenne, avec également la libre prestation de services, que nous appelons dans notre jargon la LPS. La LPS est un passeport européen précieux et solide de l'assurance luxembourgeoise qu'il faut continuer à promouvoir et à défendre. Marc, encore une chose, avec la baisse inquiétante des primes encaissées en 2020 dont tu as parlé, une petite voix me dit que les collaborateurs qui nous suivent ce soir, des assureurs luxembourgeois, peuvent s'inquiéter d'éventuelles répercussions pour leurs conditions de travail.
Sandrine, personnellement, je pense que nous avons la chance de travailler pour un secteur avec un fort engagement social. Nous venons d'ailleurs de trouver avec l'ALEBA un accord de principe sur les conditions financières d'une convention collective pour les années 2021 à 2023, prévoyant même des primes de conjoncture inchangées. Je crois que cette solution apporte stabilité et prévisibilité aux plus de 3000 salariés concernés. Voilà, maintenant j'ai assez parlé. Place maintenant à notre premier invité de ce soir, M. Claude Wirion, directeur du Commissariat aux assurances.
C'est un des événements phares de cette séance académique de l'ACA Insurance Day 2020, une interview exclusive avec Claude Wirion, qui terminera sa carrière dans l'assurance dans les prochaines semaines. Bonsoir Claude.
Bonsoir Sandrine.
Merci de nous faire l'honneur de votre présence ce soir.
C'est un grand plaisir.
Alors cette interview, c'est l'occasion pour tous ceux qui nous regardent et pour toute la communauté de l'assurance de faire un retour sur votre carrière, dont 30 ans dans l'assurance. Une carrière tout à fait remarquable, mais un parcours académique qui l'est tout autant. Et c'est un parcours hors norme au cours duquel vous allez faire des rencontres importantes. Et j'aimerais prendre le temps d'expliquer votre parcours académique à notre communauté. D'abord, vous avez fait une école de prépa au lycée Kléber à Strasbourg, en vue d'entrer à l'école polytechnique. Là, vous allez rencontrer André Renaudin, qui est l'actuel directeur général de l'AG2R, la mondiale en France. Et vous serez admis tous les deux à l'école polytechnique. Alors cette école, je précise, c'est une école militaire. On la surnomme l'X, change de format à ce moment-là. Et il est demandé aux élèves français de faire d'abord une année de service militaire. Et en tant que luxembourgeois, bien entendu, vous en êtes dispensé. Et vous allez alors, vous avez devant vous 1 an, et vous décidez, en attendant, alors non pas de faire un tour du monde, mais de faire des études de droit, parce que votre père, avocat de profession, aurait aimé que vous fassiez du droit. Et vous vous inscrivez alors à Paris 1, Panthéon-Sorbonne, et vous y faites un diplôme de droit accéléré. À ce moment-là, on pouvait faire un diplôme de 2 ans en 1 an. Et là, vous ferez la connaissance de Jean Hollinger, avec qui vous ferez un bout de carrière professionnelle plus tard à l'Inspection générale des finances. Vient enfin le moment de rejoindre l'école polytechnique, où là, Gilles Dupin, qui est aujourd'hui patron du groupe Manceau Assurance, vous rejoint sur le plateau de Palaiseau dans les tout nouveaux locaux de l'école. Mais comme c'est trop facile, pendant que vous faites polytechnique, vous continuez en parallèle vos études de droit à la Sorbonne. Et là, fraîchement diplômé de l'école polytechnique, d'une maîtrise et d'un DESS en droit, vous commencez une carrière professionnelle à Paris. Mais vous démissionnez très vite pour entrer à l'ENA, cette institution très prestigieuse qui s'appelle l'École nationale d'administration, et vous entrez dans la promotion François d'Aguesseau en 1980. Alors je dirais que vous êtes un savant mélange de juriste, polytechnicien et énarque aux couleurs luxembourgeoises. Alors d'abord félicitations, c'est très impressionnant. Je dirais aussi que votre parcours cache en fait une personnalité très riche qui a dessiné une carrière brillante. Et donc ma première question ce soir, ce serait la suivante. Comment avez-vous utilisé toutes ces compétences dans l'assurance ?
Merci de la question. Donc d'abord, à la sortie de l'ENA, j'ai rejoint l'inspection générale des finances, comme vous venez de le dire. C'était un choix un peu normal. D'abord, on m'avait proposé ce poste à la sortie de l'école. Et en rejoignant l'inspection des finances à Luxembourg, je suivais un peu les plus brillants des élèves français de l'ENA, pour lesquels l'inspection générale des finances en France est toujours le premier corps qui est choisi pour les premiers classés. J'ai passé 10 ans à l'inspection générale des finances à Luxembourg avant de céder aux sirènes de M. Victor Roth, directeur à l'époque du commissariat aux assurances, ou plutôt du service de contrôle des assurances, comme il s'appelait à l'époque, qui était d'ailleurs un service de création assez récente. Mais pendant les 10 ans d'inspection, c'était déjà un premier temps où j'ai pu à la fois manier des chiffres et le droit. Parce que comme inspecteur, on avait pour mission principale, à part de préparer chaque année le budget, de donner des avis sur des projets de loi dont il fallait saisir les subtilités juridiques, mais aussi d'en calculer le coût, parce que beaucoup de projets de loi, malheureusement, ont un coût pour les finances publiques. En 92, j'ai donc rejoint M. Victor Roth lors de la création du commissariat aux assurances par une loi du 6 décembre 1991. Et avec M. Bellion, on a formé le premier comité de direction de ce nouveau établissement public. Voilà donc comment je suis arrivé à cet endroit-là. Donc ce qui m'avait séduit justement pour entrer au commissariat, c'était encore plus prononcé qu'à l'inspection des finances, ce mariage des sciences mathématiques et du juridique, parce que si à l'inspection des finances, il faut faire surtout des additions et des soustractions, on fait déjà de l'actualisation dans le domaine des assurances, on calcule des probabilités, donc c'est quelque chose de plus, disons, de plus sérieux en termes mathématiques qu'à l'inspection. Et je pense que c'est cet aspect-là qui était loin de me, donc qui avait beaucoup pour me séduire.
Alors vous avez parlé de mariage de compétences. Je dirais que vous avez parlé également de Victor Roth et c'était, je crois, un binôme gagnant-gagnant. J'en viens à la question suivante. Vous avez donc eu des rencontres importante dans votre carrière. Et j'ai donc voulu en savoir plus sur vous et je suis allée à la rencontre de certaines personnalités qui vous connaissent. Et j'ai donc une surprise pour vous. Regardez, ça se passe par ici.
J'ai eu le plaisir et la chance de rencontrer Claude Wirion très tôt, puisque nous étions tous les deux ensemble étudiants à Paris. Comme il a quelques années de plus que moi, il était à la fin de son parcours estudiantin et je dois dire qu'on le regardait avec beaucoup d'admiration puisque tout le monde savait qu'il avait fait Polytechnique et l'ENA et rares sont les Luxembourgeois qui ont ce cursus et effectivement cela a balisé sa carrière.
Die Kombination von Mathematik et von droit ist évidemment un atout gewesen, weil das sind zwei Eckdomänen, die in der Assurance ganz wichtig sind.
Parce que dans un premier cas, il faut dire bien trempé, donc ça fait 2 mots. Un caractère bien trempé, oui.
Extrem kompetent, ganz seriös, ganz pragmatisch.
Ich muss auch sagen, das ist ein exzellenter Negoziateur.
C'est un très grand mélomane, ça je crois que les gens le savent. Aussi un très grand interprète, ça les gens le savent moins.
En dat is ook een die ganz viel Humor hat, van den gut kennt.
Ein letzter Punkt, den er charakterisiert, den ich aber wirklich wichtig fand, und das ist extrem loyal.
Decision den Claude Wirion zu nennen, als mir nicht schwer gefallen, muss ich sagen. Aber es war die richtige Decision und es war eine von den besten Decisionen, die ich an meiner Karriere als Minister geholt habe. Und ich meine, das, was Claude gelegt hat, an den letzten 5 Jahren zusammen mit seiner Karriere für drun, schwätzt für sich selber.
Alors, il y a beaucoup question de rencontres dans ce témoignage. Est-ce que vous voulez réagir à ce premier
Mais je suis très ému de voir toutes ces personnes que je connais bien, que je continue de fréquenter et ça me fait beaucoup plaisir.
Ah ouais, je suis contente. Alors, quelles sont les personnes qui ont été justement importantes pour vous au cours de votre carrière?
Comme je l'ai déjà cité, Victor Roth pour moi était une rencontre très importante. C'est lui qui m'a ouvert la richesse du monde de l'assurance. Au-delà des aspects purement techniques, je pense que ce que Victor Roth m'a appris, c'était aussi le sens du faisable. Monsieur Roth n'était pas seulement un bon technicien qui avait une vaste connaissance du monde de l'assurance, d'ailleurs qu'il avait fréquenté des deux côtés parce qu'il était à l'ACA avant de devenir le chef du contrôle, mais il m'a appris une grande leçon de pragmatisme et de ce qui était politiquement faisable. On a très souvent de très bonnes idées en tant que fonctionnaire, encore faut-il que ces idées soient réalisables, et je pense que là c'est une leçon d'humilité que Victor m'a appris à bien maîtriser avec le temps, tout en restant ferme sur certaines convictions, mais regarder comment on peut mettre en musique les idées qu'on a et bien entendu écouter aussi la voix du secteur, ce qui est très important.
Il y a aussi 2 autres personnes qui étaient très importantes pour vous.
Oui, 2 autres personnes importantes. Je pense en premier lieu à Jean-Louis Bellandeau. Jean-Louis Bellandeau, c'était le chef du contrôle français qui s'appelait à l'époque la commission de contrôle des assurances, avec qui j'ai eu beaucoup de plaisir à batailler lors des négociations communautaires, notamment dans les négociations qui ont mené à l'adoption des 2e et 3e directives d'assurance, donc les directives qui ont créé le marché unique de l'assurance. C'était un grand professionnel, c'était un spécialiste des questions de solvabilité. Il m'avait convaincu d'ailleurs, ensemble avec Marc Lauer, de nous intéresser de près au comité des assurances de l'OCDE, auquel je suis resté fidèle. D'ailleurs, lorsqu'il est parti à la retraite, il y a déjà de nombreuses années, malheureusement il est décédé il y a quelques années, il m'a prié de prendre sa succession dans le groupe des experts gouvernementaux au sein du comité des assurances, poste que j'ai accepté avec beaucoup de plaisir et poste que je vais quitter avec beaucoup de regrets après une ultime session de ce comité au mois de décembre de cette année-ci. Enfin, une 3e personne que je voudrais absolument citer, c'est Karel van Hulle. Karel van Hulle, un grand commis européen qui était à la tête de la DG Assurance à la Commission européenne, avec qui j'étais une première fois en contact lors des négociations sur la directive des comptes annuels des entreprises d'assurance et de réassurance, que j'ai pu rencontrer par la suite à la commission en change de direction de temps en temps. J'ai eu beaucoup de plaisir lorsqu'il est retourné au début des années 2000 et lorsqu'il a pris en main le grand chantier Solvabilité 2. Et je pense que Karel van Hulle mérite sans aucun doute le titre de père du régime Solvabilité 2. Encore que je suis sûr que Solvabilité 2, la manière dont cette réforme a été implémentée, diffère un peu peut-être de ses idées initiales qu'on avait vraiment portées à bout de bras en tant que luxembourgeois à l'époque.
Alors nous avons à l'ACA le manuel de Solvabilité 2 de Karen von Hulle et je vous avoue, je ne l'ai pas lu. Alors, comment voyez-vous la relation avec l'ACA? Et j'aimerais savoir si vous avez une anecdote à partager avec ceux qui nous écoutent ce soir.
Les relations avec l'ACA étaient toujours excellentes. Comme je vous l'ai dit, Victor Rode venait de l'ACA, donc les relations n'auraient pas pu être à un plus beau fixe que celui auquel elles ont toujours été. Mais moi, j'ai connu l'ACA donc déjà à la fin des années 80, lorsque Victor Rode m'avait demandé de l'épauler dans des calculs actuariels et regarder un peu les notes techniques en assurance vie. Alors, j'avais le privilège d'assister à certaines rencontres bilatérales avec l'ACA. Pour moi, c'était un club de gentlemen en costume 3 pièces, cravate, mais qui s'amusaient bien entre eux tout de même, au-delà des discussions tout à fait cordiales. À l'époque, on discutait de tarification auto, dont les tarifs étaient fixés à l'époque par le gouvernement. Et donc, le gouvernement attendait bien entendu impatiemment l'avis du commissariat aux assurances avant d'agréer un nouveau tarif. Et donc, j'étais très impressionné par ces hommes en costume gris, noir, alors que c'était peut-être un peu plus relax à l'inspection générale des finances. Mais de club de gentlemen, je pense que l'ACA a tout de même connu une mue importante. Ça reste toujours des gentlemen. D'ailleurs, l'ACA s'est beaucoup féminisé depuis. À l'époque, bien entendu, les femmes étaient inexistantes ou du moins rarissimes et parfois avec des passages plus ou moins éphémères. Oui, il faut bien le dire comme ça. Mais les relations étaient toujours excellentes. Je pense que nous avions, en tant que commissariat, beaucoup de points communs avec l'ACA. Bien entendu, des deux côtés, nous avions à l'esprit donc la protection du consommateur et je ne connais pas d'assureur qui n'ait jamais eu ça à l'esprit, mais nous étions également animés par une même volonté de développer le secteur. Et je pense que cette communauté d'objectifs a beaucoup aidé aux bonnes relations. Et les relations, d'ailleurs, étaient tellement bonnes qu'à un certain moment, je pense que c'était vers la fin des années 90, début des années 2000, le commissariat se cherchait un nouveau siège et occupait un siège 6 boulevard Royal. Et malheureusement, donc, la banque qui était propriétaire de l'immeuble le mettait en vente et la question s'est posée pour nous en tant que locataires si on n'était pas preneur pour acquérir l'immeuble. C'est un immeuble qui existe d'ailleurs toujours, aujourd'hui occupé par la Banque centrale, qui faisait 8 étages. Et manifestement, à l'époque, nous n'avions pas besoin de toute cette place-là. On avait songé à l'ACA, qui était aussi à la recherche de nouveaux locaux, si elle n'était pas intéressée pour emménager avec nous, pas pour faire ménage commun, mais pour avoir chacun ses étages. Bien entendu, les étages supérieurs resteraient réservés au commissariat et aux assurances, cela va de soi. Je pense que le choix était d'autant plus simple qu'il y avait un assureur aux étages inférieurs de l'immeuble et on avait pensé que remplacer une association par un assureur, ça ne pouvait faire que bon effet. Bon, l'affaire ne s'est pas faite, il y avait tout de même certains problèmes d'image de marque, mais avec un regard vers l'arrière, je dis heureusement que l'affaire ne s'est pas faite, parce que depuis lors, les effectifs du commissariat donc, ont tout de même bien augmenté, de même que ceux de l'ACA. Et si on avait partagé cet immeuble, l'un des deux aurait dû céder sa place pour faire de la place à l'autre. Mais encore une fois, cela souligne les bonnes relations qu'il y a toujours eu entre l'association et le commissariat.
Merci pour ça et merci pour cette anecdote. De mon côté, j'en ai une autre. Vous êtes curieux ?
Toujours.
Oui. Alors, on a une autre surprise pour vous et pour ceux qui sont derrière les caméras.
Si je dois me souvenir d'une seule anecdote et de l'anecdote qui a été un peu l'apothéose de nos relations, c'est bien sûr dans une journée de l'ACA, le jour où j'ai mené cette table ronde sur Solvency II. Comme mon autorité de tutelle, il m'avait demandé d'avoir une réunion au préalable pour pouvoir préparer la réunion avec les autres membres du panel. J'avais accepté de venir jusqu'à mon bureau. Et il m'a dit, Martial, Monsieur de Calbiac, puisqu'à l'époque il m'appelait Monsieur de Calbiac, c'était les rapports administrés à autorité de tutelle. Monsieur de Calbiac, quelles sont les questions que vous allez me poser ? Et je lui avais répondu, Monsieur le directeur du commissariat aux assurances, si je vous pose les questions à l'avance, il n'y aura aucune spontanéité de votre part. Donc prenez donc un café, mais vous aurez la surprise le jour où nous aurons cette table ronde.
La table ronde a été assez animée, mais pas tout à fait dans le sens très académique. Enfin, on a tout de même dit beaucoup de choses telles qu'on les pensait. Et à la fin de cette table ronde, Martial s'est levé et a été chercher ce qu'il avait préparé, donc un paquet cadeau qu'il a offert à Claude. C'était l'intégrale de « À la recherche du temps perdu » de Marcel Proust.
Il les a emportés à la fin de la séance et donc il a pu lire environ 3500 pages de Proust, ce qui est quand même beaucoup plus intéressant que les 10 000 pages qu'il a dû se lire en matière de rapports narratifs de toutes les compagnies d'assurance vie, d'assurance non-vie et de compagnies de réassurance.
Et c'est vrai que c'était très surprenant dans ce cadre-là et Claude, de manière il était impressionnant parce qu'il ne s'est pas départi du tout de son sérieux.
Alors, je voudrais juste préciser, pour ceux qui nous regardent et qui ne connaissent peut-être pas Martial de Calbiac, c'est un ancien assureur du groupe Crédit Agricole. Mais Claude, la question que tout le monde se pose, est-ce que vous avez lu l'intégrale des œuvres de Marcel Proust?
J'avais dit à l'époque que je lirais Marcel Proust, que j'adore d'ailleurs beaucoup, et dont j'ai lu certains de ses livres du côté de Guermantes, par exemple, mais donc de lire l'intégralité après mon départ à la retraite. Bon, mon départ à la retraite, il est imminent, et donc le 2 janvier, je pense que je vais attaquer cette lecture importante. Martial a tout de même oublié de parler d'une autre promesse qu'il m'avait fait à l'époque. Donc, il avait déclamé certains vers en alexandrin. Et je l'avais mis au défi de nous donner le prochain reporting trimestriel en alexandrin. Je le mettais au défi, il a tenu parole et nous avons pour une fois reçu un reporting trimestriel avec une lettre d'accompagnement en alexandrin.
Alors là, bravo Martial, bravo. Est-ce que vous vous souvenez qui était sur ce panel?
Justement, il y avait Martial, il y avait Gilles Lupin, oui.
Voilà, il y avait Jacques Faverolles et il y avait aussi Thierry Flamand, votre successeur.
D'accord.
Alors, revenons à nos madeleines de Léa Linster. Vos contributions au secteur de l'assurance luxembourgeoise sont nombreuses. Quelles sont celles dont vous êtes le plus fier, Monsieur Wirion?
J'ai été engagé en 1992 par Victor Roth pour assumer la responsabilité du secteur de l'assurance vie. Et je crois effectivement que ce secteur s'est beaucoup développé depuis 1992. C'était les débuts du marché unique. Les deuxièmes directives venaient juste d'être adoptées. On était en train encore de libéraliser davantage le marché avec les troisièmes directives assurance, créant le marché unique. Et à l'époque, le Luxembourg connaissait surtout les produits à taux garanti. Aujourd'hui, on dirait les produits en euros. À l'époque, c'était les produits en francs belgo-luxembourgeois avec des garanties. Les contrats en lieu de compte, c'était quelque chose de tout à fait nouveau, dont tout le monde se méfiait un petit peu parce que le preneur d'assurance supporte seul le risque de placement. Mais on avait vu de grandes opportunités dans ces produits à condition que l'encadrement juridique soit le bon. Et je crois qu'on a été un des premiers pays à voir qu'il y avait différents besoins avec différentes clientèles différentes. Alors que dans d'autres pays, soit on n'avait pas de règles du tout, soit on avait des règles très strictes pour protéger même le plus ignare des preneurs d'assurance. Nous, on avait mis en place un cadre réglementaire pour segmenter la clientèle, et plus on avait en face de soi un client sophistiqué et instruit, plus on lui permettait de prendre des risques. Je pense que cette mise en place de ce cadre, qui s'est fait bien entendu en entente avec le secteur, a fait le succès de la place d'assurance et qui ont culminé dans la création des contrats dédiés. Encore ce matin, j'ai vu qu'il y a certains projets fiscaux en Belgique où la notion de contrat dédié est citée au moins 20 fois dans l'article, alors que cette notion même est une invention luxembourgeoise, mais bien entendu, ça, personne ne le sait plus aujourd'hui. Donc, je pense que là, c'est une première réussite. Une deuxième réussite de ma carrière, je crois que j'ai tout de même beaucoup contribué à l'élaboration et à la mise en place du droit communautaire. À 2 reprises, j'avais eu la chance de pouvoir présider un groupe de travail du Conseil et à 2 fois, j'ai pu mener à son terme les négociations permettant d'aboutir à un accord politique au Conseil sur les directives. Une première fois, c'était au début des années 90 sur la directive sur les comptes annuels et comptes consolidés des entreprises d'assurance et de réassurance. C'était un texte extrêmement ardu, comptable. Je n'essaierai pas de l'expliquer ici devant la caméra. Une deuxième fois, c'était sur la surveillance des assurances faisant partie d'un groupe. Donc, ce sont 2 directives où le Luxembourg a joué un rôle important parce que nous avions la présidence du Conseil. Mais, mis à part ces 2 textes, j'ai tout de même pu contribuer à l'élaboration pratiquement de toutes les directives qui ont vu le jour en matière d'assurance depuis le début des années 90 jusqu'à l'adoption à peu près de Solvency II. Lorsque je suis devenu directeur du commissariat, bien entendu, je n'ai plus pu m'impliquer autant dans la préparation des textes communautaires, mais je continue de les suivre de près, notamment au sein de l'AIOPA, donc qui est l'autorité de contrôle en matière d'assurance de l'Union européenne.
Le Brexit également, certainement.
Oui, alors le troisième défi, c'était le Brexit. Le Brexit, c'était quelque chose qui n'était pas du tout dans mes intentions lorsque j'ai pris la tête du commissariat. Mais après un premier dossier, j'ai vu un potentiel important avec ce Brexit. J'avais vu que beaucoup de compagnies anglaises qui étaient un peu implantées un peu partout en Europe avec des filiales, mais surtout des succursales, cherchaient un territoire neutre qui avait beaucoup d'expérience en matière de libre passation de services et de liberté d'établissement. Et là, je voyais une opportunité pour le Luxembourg. Je crois que les grands cabinets et les consultants luxembourgeois l'avaient senti de la même façon. On a vu beaucoup de personnes, presque une quarantaine d'entreprises. 11 ont fait le choix du Luxembourg. C'est un succès indéniable. Et on a vu en l'espace d'une seule année, entre 2018 et 2019, l'encaissement en assurance non-vie triplé en une seule année.
Bravo pour ces 3 contributions très importantes pour le secteur. Je vous invite maintenant à regarder votre contribution, mais avec le regard de vos pairs. Voilà.
Dem Claude Wirion seg Kontributionun zur Finanzplatz also sech enorm, weil inkarnéiert sowohl de Serieux vun der Iwerwachung, an dat das haut eng Konditionun fir eng serieux Finanzplatz zu hunn.
Il est très business-minded. Pour un responsable de contrôle, c'est quelque chose d'extrêmement rare.
Dans l'exercice de sa responsabilité, Claude Wirion a beaucoup contribué à établir, à renforcer la crédibilité du marché luxembourgeois de l'assurance.
mat engem mat bëssen Humor alle go seg Excel-Sheet na Reportingen Dir gemacht huet.
De Claude Wirion als ganz klar de Pap vun der Lützeburger Lebensversicherung am internationalen Domain hier am Land.
Wann de Claude Wirion seg Matier beherrscht huet, dann wären exzellent.
Wie in 2015 dun den Generaldirektor ginn ass huet heen am dee 5 Joer wo do wär d'Opportunitéit vum Brexit onwahrscheinlich gut ausgenutzt.
Mais c'est quand même grâce à lui, si on peut compter en plusieurs dizaines de milliards, les encaissements de la place luxembourgeoise. Donc bravo à lui.
Des beaux messages, n'est-ce pas?
Merci, oui, tout à fait.
Je voudrais juste préciser à nos internautes que Claude Marx, qui est le directeur général de la commission de surveillance du secteur financier, a aussi une carrière dans l'assurance.
Tout à fait.
Alors, le temps nous manque, mais j'aimerais savoir, Claude Wirion, est-ce que vous avez des regrets, quelque chose que vous auriez aimé voir avant votre départ qui n'a pas pu être réalisé?
Oui, donc en accédant à la direction, j'avais l'intention aussi de faire quelque chose en matière de réassurance, surtout dans le domaine des captifs de réassurance, de moderniser quelque peu le cadre prudentiel applicable à la provision d'égalisation. Donc c'est un terme technique, mais qui est un des grands atouts de la place, qui permet justement d'accumuler en franchise d'impôt des capacités financières pour faire face à des risques exceptionnels, mais rares. C'est quelque chose de très important et la crise sanitaire actuelle nous montre l'importance de ce genre de mécanisme. Donc, encore une fois, j'aurais voulu progresser sur ce dossier-là. Malheureusement, d'autres priorités comme Solvabilité 2 et le Brexit ont, disons, accabré les capacités du commissariat et on n'a pas pu beaucoup avancer. Donc, ce serait bien que mon successeur reprenne le flambeau à cet égard-là. Un deuxième sujet, c'était moderniser un peu l'accès à la profession d'agent d'assurance. Comme agent d'assurance, on a besoin d'un permis de conduire. Pour le permis de conduire, ça fait longtemps qu'on est passé d'une épreuve un peu vieillotte sur papier à une épreuve de type informatique où on répond à quelques questions sur un écran. Mon intention, c'était de faire la même chose pour les agents d'assurance. Quitte à ne pas renoncer à la qualité et à la difficulté de l'examen, mais que c'était quelque chose de plus rapide pour passer. On avait tout mis en place, les programmes sont prêts, les tablettes sont prêtes. Malheureusement, la crise financière a empêché la réalisation de ce projet ou ce projet d'aller à son terme. Parce que la manipulation de tablettes par de multiples personnes n'est peut-être pas indiquée dans la crise sanitaire actuelle, mais tout est prêt et j'espère quelque part au milieu de 2021, le premier examen sous sa nouvelle forme. D'ailleurs, on avait fait quelques galops d'essais avec la profession qui avait montré que techniquement tout était prêt. J'espère donc qu'on pourrait aller grandeur nature en 2021.
Oui, ce sujet vous passionne et je suis quasi convaincue que ces compétences que vous avez acquises en administration, mathématiques et en droit, en fait, vous a mené tout droit à cet enthousiasme dans l'examen d'agent. Alors maintenant, très rapidement, peut-être en conclusion, si on se projette, vous avez parlé de votre successeur, dans le futur de quelques semaines, quels sont les 3 mots que vous diriez, les 3 do's and don'ts que vous donneriez à Thierry Flamand?
En premier lieu, je voudrais saluer la nomination de Thierry Flamand comme mon successeur. Je connais Thierry Flamand depuis très longtemps. Il a fait une longue carrière comme consultant dans le domaine de l'assurance. Je le connais par l'association des actuaires. C'est un grand professionnel à qui je n'ai pas beaucoup de leçons à donner. Comme consultant, il est pleinement conscient du caractère international de la place d'assurance du Luxembourg. Mais l'international ne se décline pas uniquement sur le terrain, l'international se décline aussi dans l'élaboration des textes, des nouvelles idées qui voient le jour. Et je pense que Thierry Flamand, je pense qu'on aura sûrement à cœur de participer activement aux travaux de l'AIOPA au niveau de la Commission du Conseil pour l'élaboration de nouveaux textes au niveau communautaire. Mais j'ai évoqué le think tank qu'est le comité de l'assurance de l'OCDE. J'espère aussi que lui et d'autres gens du comité vont partager mon enthousiasme pour l'OCDE en la matière et reprendre le flambeau et peut-être même participer activement dans les travaux de l'OCDE. Mais il ne faut pas perdre de vue non plus l'IAIS, qui est l'Association internationale des contrôleurs d'assurance, que Victor Rode avait toujours suivi, que moi-même j'ai suivi depuis que je suis directeur, et je suis sûr que Thierry Flamand fera de même. Quant au style de gouvernance, bien entendu, chaque directeur devra trouver son propre style. Ce ne sera pas à moi de lui donner des conseils à cet égard. Je dirais uniquement que Thierry Flamand a la chance d'être épaulé par 2 autres membres de la direction qui sont de vieux routiers de l'assurance, qui ont une énorme expérience professionnelle et qui seront là pour lui expliquer un peu le fonctionnement interne du commissariat et des dossiers brûlants de la place. Mais au-delà des 2 membres de la direction, le commissariat aujourd'hui dispose d'une équipe de plus d'une 50aine de personnes, pour la plupart des professionnels chevronnés, avec un bon mélange de gens qui ont rejoint le commissariat en disposant déjà de nombreuses années dans l'assurance, avec des gens qui viennent de l'université, qui viennent avec des idées tout à fait neuves. Je suis sûr que Thierry Flamand pourra s'appuyer sur toute cette équipe pour avoir un mandat couronné de succès.
Alors sur ces paroles de succès, au nom de toute l'ACA, de l'équipe de l'ACA, du conseil d'administration de l'ACA et de toute la communauté de l'assurance luxembourgeoise, nous tenons à vous remercier pour votre engagement, pour votre grande contribution à ce qu'est aujourd'hui l'assurance luxembourgeoise. Merci Et je me joins enfin à votre femme Chantal, à vos enfants, Caroline, Elisabeth et Paul, qui vous disent « Claude, papa, tu as assez travaillé, profite maintenant ».
Je ne vais pas manquer de le faire et merci beaucoup Sandrine.
Merci Claude. Et maintenant, après une aussi belle carrière au service de l'assurance luxembourgeoise, vous êtes sans doute aussi curieux que nous tous de savoir comment aborder les défis de la place et du secteur dans ce monde de New Normal qui a bouleversé tous nos repères. Nous avons la chance d'écouter ce soir Pierre Gramegna, ministre des Finances, et Marc Lauer, président de l'ACA et CEO du groupe Foyer. Pierre, Marc, the floor is yours.
Good evening, Pierre.
Good evening.
Nice to have you here. I think you are one of the most loyal participants at the ACA Insurance Day. I think since you are in office, you never missed a single one. And so you could observe over the years the changes. It started small, it got bigger, got more professional. We started speaking English. Last year, this room was full with 1,000 people. And this year, it's different. New words come to our mind. COVID, Corona, social distancing, and so on. So if I may start our little discussion tonight in front of a fireplace, so my first question would be a very personal one. How do you live this period as Pierre?
Thank you, Mark, for this very personal question. First of all, I would like to say that it's always a pleasure to attend the ACA Insurance Day. It is the 8th time I participate, and it's the 8th time that it is being organized the way it used to be. This year is an exception, and I'm glad to be here. Rightly, you have pointed out that the role of a human being and direct contacts are key. So how I live this is the following. After World War I, 40,000 books were written about that war. And only 400 books were written on the Spanish flu, which happened at the same time. And the Spanish flu killed more people than World War I. And why do I say this? Well, because there is no blueprint to react towards a pandemic like the one we're living through. So we don't have the recipes. We don't have a handbook to react. And so that's how I've lived it. My colleague in Europe at ministerial level tell me the same thing. And what I realize is that we are not really prepared for such a situation. And so it is a very challenging time because you have to take a lot of decisions without having the necessary preparation, but I think we're coping with it.
Yes, I think we have already now experience of 6 months. That's already one part. It's, I think, for us, everybody of us, quite a tough period. And normally around this time, you start asking yourself, what will I get as a present for Christmas, for my family? Will there be a white Christmas? So one question for me would be, to you as decision maker, will there be this year Christmas which we can celebrate with family and friends?
Yes, there would definitely be a Christmas because Christmas comes every year and is a time of joy and a time where families hold together. And there's many different ways one can celebrate it. It will certainly be a more intimistic Christmas this year. Celebrations will probably be more in the limited circle of the family, and why not do the best out of it? Those who are very far away, you might maybe only be able to see them through Skype or through WhatsApp. So why not? Why not make the best out of it if that's the only way?
how you can share the meal. Why not have that meal on distance? And be creative, innovative. Instead of having nostalgia, make the best out of it. Be optimistic, draw the lessons from it, and look to the future with optimism.
I know that you are an optimistic person by nature.
Yes.
But for the next few weeks, which we still have to go up and until Christmas, there are several things which are influencing us. First of all, we're going from Thursday on again to a lockdown. A new lockdown, probably less hard than the first we lived. And at the same time, we get quite a lot of news about new vaccines which should be soon ready and which should help us to get over that crisis. And of course, as a representative of the financial sector, I ask myself the question, what are the perspectives, the economic perspectives here in Luxembourg and also in Europe?
Well, I think it is worthwhile to say a few words on what has really happened in the last 8-9 months. We have also drawn the lessons from the first wave of the pandemic. We have in Luxembourg tried to avoid a general lockdown, and we've been able to achieve that. You mentioned correctly that from Thursday on, restaurants and bars are going to be closed again, but it is a very partial lockdown that we're doing. The rest of the economy is, to a large extent, kept open. So that's something that most countries have tried to do, and I think we've been rather good at that, limiting really the scope of the lockdown. The second thing is that we have also to draw the lessons that lots of things can be done differently. I think of remote work that has been used more generally in the financial sector in particular. And that has offset to a certain extent the slowdown of the economy as we have experienced it all over Europe and all over the world. So I think that the downturn of GDP in Luxembourg will be slightly less than the average of the European Union, thanks also to the financial sector and the availability of very efficient infrastructure in Luxembourg in terms of digital. Now, you rightly mentioned the vaccines. Had we had this meeting a month ago, I would have been less optimistic because nobody was really sure when vaccines would be available. In the last weeks, lots of good information has come, so we can really count on having vaccines at least in the beginning of next year, and that will obviously smoothen the situation, and we can see the light at the end of the tunnel. Now, apart from all of this, I think for all countries and also our country, the cost of the pandemic, which has transformed itself in an economic crisis, is huge. Instead of having a balanced budget as was scheduled for this year, we're going to have a deep deficit. Same for next year, although next year I think we'll be able to halve the deficit. But I think it was the right thing to do, to support the economy and not do what was done in 2008, 2009 or in the 1920s, where governments and central banks decided to reduce credit, to reduce the monetary mass. In this instance, the European Central Bank and the European governments had decided exactly the contrary, to have a very expansionary policy. And by doing so, unemployment has not rise quite a lot on the one hand. Second, we've been able to ensure purchasing power being stable for most people thanks to short labor schemes. And last but not least, we have decided in Luxembourg, like many other countries, lots of subsidies to companies that have been allowed by the EU on a special occasion like this one. I think this period will go down as a period where a lot of innovation has happened, how governments react to a crisis.
Yeah, I think we saw that the government was very reactive. The insurance sector as such managed also quite quickly to turn from on-site working to full or almost full teleworking. We also, I think as a sector, participated quite at large scale at subscribing at the loan you were launching at the end of at the end of spring for financing all the measures you were taking to the government. And we're also discussing, I think, with your ministry, how to find solutions if, what we don't hope, another such pandemic crisis would raise, how we could finance that in a better way. Still, I think that for the insurance sector, also to speak a little bit about the sector I'm representing, the worst is still to come. I think there will be quite a lot of bankruptcies and of our corporate clients, and that will hit our balance sheets. But there's one problem which scares us even more, and that's interest rates. You were telling that central banks and governments were taking profit of the fact that credit was large. That means interest rates were low. They were already low before the crisis. They got even lower in the crisis. But unfortunately, interest rates is the fuel the life insurance model is working on. And so having on a very long run interest rates which are low makes it very difficult for our sector. So do you have any perspectives if on the long run interest rates will come back to more normal levels?
Well, obviously, it is not upon me to decide that. It's the European Central Bank that will decide that. With all due respect, I will say that I have always advocated that a low interest rate policy or even a negative interest rate policy cannot be kept in the long run. I've said that already 3-4 years ago, and I stick to that idea. So we need to design a way out of that, to that policy, because you cannot keep it in the long run. Not only because of the insurance sector, just because of how investment policies must work, how an economy must work. Another thing that needs to be seen is that the way out of a low interest rate policy can only be a step-by-step policy. So no abrupt policy. So we need predictability here. So when is the turnaround going to happen is not known yet. And I think now that we're in the pandemic, still is certainly not the right time. But I think we have splendid people at the European Central Bank, and we will certainly discuss with the European Central Bank about the timing. One thing that is very important to me, connected with the insurance companies, is that in the context of Solvency II, we must take into account that situation of very low interest rates, and we must reduce the burdens of insurance companies, especially if we want them to be more active investors in the economy. So I think that what was key for Solvency II, the necessary capital buffers and requirements that insurance companies need to take, need also to be seen in another context, that the huge capacities of finance that insurance companies have need to be deployed also for the real economy. So I think that's quite a challenge also to come.
I think that sounds like good news to our sector, because no interest rates is a difficult environment for our sector, and we want, as big institutional investors, to help to get the economy going again. We're facing another little more big challenge. Pierre, we are 95% of our business is written cross-border. And over the last years, we have a little bit a feeling that there's again a tendency of fragmentation in the European market. Indeed, we feel that in some states, you put national rules on the European rules in order to make cross-border working a little bit more cumbersome. And when in the beginning of the year, or in March, when, as Marc said, the borders were closing, we saw that as, again, another reaction of focusing again on national issues rather than European issues. Fortunately, now, in September, when the second wave came and certain countries went to lockdown, they didn't close the borders. So is that a hope that we can have, that eventually this sanitary crisis will give a new energy to the European idea and a little bit push away the nationalistic reactions we had observed in the past?
I can answer that question with one word: yes, definitely. But I'm going also to explain why I say that. You've given one example of hope by comparing the second wave and the measures taken by governments in the second wave compared to the first one. And that's a very good example. We were quite afraid in Luxembourg to see borders closing during the first wave. And it seems that many countries have learned that, or have realized that the virus doesn't stop at the border. So this is good news. But there's quite a lot more good news that has happened in the last 6 months. To tell you the truth, when the pandemic started in March, I was very much afraid that Europe could be a kind of collateral victim of the pandemic. And Luxembourg, together with 8 other countries, wrote a letter to Charles Michel, the president of the European Council, saying, we need European solidarity here to be strengthened and to happen. What was at stake was we have a pandemic that is something that hits all the countries at the same time, more or less with the same depth. And we need to react together. If we don't do that, we're going to increase the gap, the differences between countries. We're going to create the reverse of solidarity, nationalism. And by the 9th of April, which is still very much in the beginning of the crisis, we agreed a package at the level of finance ministers worth 540 billion euro with 3 very important measures. One was with European Stability Mechanism making ready 240 billion for emergency loans, which is now there and available, and then 200 billion of ways to guarantee loans for small and medium-sized companies. That is being done by the European Investment Bank, and 100 billion that are there to finance short labor schemes in Europe is called SURE, and this program is also already working. On top of that, we already announced the principle of the Solidarity and Resilience Fund, which was decided by prime ministers in July. All this has been done in a couple of months. And if you had asked me in February, would Europe ever do a thing like that, I would have said no, despite the fact that I'm a great optimist and a great believer in European integration. And last but not least, to implement all those measures of the Resilience and Solidarity Fund, you have to realize that the EU will, for the first time, go on the markets through the Commission to take up loans on behalf of the member countries. Also, this is a major step toward solidarity, and some of these bonds have already been issued and listed at the Luxembourg Stock Exchange quite recently and are submitted to Luxembourg law, which is a consequence of Brexit, because these loans used to be normally issued under British law. So lots of reasons to be optimistic and see that Europe has lived up to the challenge that we were all facing together.
It's always nice to speak to somebody who sees that the glass is half full and not half empty.
Yes.
If the chairman of an insurance association is speaking to his minister and his regulator, he can't avoid speaking about regulation. That's what it is. But I don't want to speak about all the regulations. IOPA, so the European Insurance Supervisory Authority, or the Commission, are for the moment imagining. I would annoy you, and probably I would also annoy our audience, but I have to come back to one single point. And without surprise, it's teleworking. And you say, oh my God, everything has been said about that. Almost. Because I don't want to speak about all the fiscal and social security framework which has to be adapted so teleworking could work well in Luxembourg. But I want to come to one point which is very important for our sector. We have professional secrecy rules which are written in a way that in fact, if we read the law by the letter, it is very difficult to do telework. It's during the crisis, due to the fact that Claude Wirion is a very pragmatic guy and could also give a very large interpretation of what's possible and what's not possible, he gave us a possibility to us and to our colleagues to work also by telework cross-border. Fortunately, this is not a situation which can continue forever. So we are still hoping that we could come into a discussion with you in order to find a good balance on one side, personal and client data protection, and on the other side, taking into account more the new technologies like cloud computing, even there when the server is not located in Luxembourg.
Yes, I get your point, and it's a very valid one on which we need to work. I can promise you here today that we're going to look for a dialogue with ACA, with the professionals of the sector, together with the Commissariat and the Ministry of Finance, to see how we need to adjust our legislation. This is true for the insurance companies. Something similar needs to be done and looked at for the financial sector in general. We live in a completely different world, and teleworking will not disappear. We are doing teleworking right here all together. Who would have imagined that last year? So it will not go away. We have a particular aspect here, which is the obvious, but as we might have many listeners also across border from Luxembourg, it's important to realize that when you talk about teleworking in Luxembourg, you're also speaking about crossing boundaries, crossing the limits of our country, which when you are in Clermont-Ferrand and you do teleworking, even if people drive 300 kilometers, they're still in France. So here the situation deserves a closer look how we deal with it, and I can promise you my door is, like always, open and we'll find good solutions.
Thank you, Pierre. I spoke beforehand about Claude Wirion, and I think we all already expressed to him all the many thanks for everything which he has done for the insurance sector. And meanwhile, we also heard that his successor is Thierry Flamand, which you appointed. Can you share some of the advice you gave to Thierry when going into that new challenge, professional challenge?
Oh, well, I had a long interview with him prior to hiring him, but I refrained from giving him advice. In terms of governance, that would not be good in the 21st century. But today I can make an exception because we are in a celebratory mood, and we have described what Claude has done over the years. I think the qualities that Claude Wirion has are key to do a good job. And I would like to summarize them. I see two words starting with a C and two words starting with an I. So Claude was competent and cordial. And I would say these are two qualities that are very important. And two I's, you need to be international and innovative. And in the interview we just saw with Claude Wirion, he illustrated how much he was also interested in following what the OECD does, what the EU does, and how else can you also do it in a country like Luxembourg, because our insurance sector is to 95% international. And what has made the strength of our country always in the past is to be a pioneer, and you can say it differently, to anticipate the needs. And there's so many things still to work on, and I wish Thierry Flamand good luck, and you always need luck in life. And if I look at the 5 years where Claude Wirion was at the head of the Commissariat aux Assurances, who of us would have thought that a Brexit decision would happen and that we could turn that challenge into such an opportunity? And in fact, it makes me think of the pandemic. We can certainly learn things from the pandemic and turn certain aspects of the pandemic into opportunities.
So you're the optimistic guy. I'm speaking about crisis. I spoke about the sanitary crisis. I spoke to the about the economic crisis. But I think, in fact, we are facing all together a much bigger crisis, which is the ecological crisis, the climate crisis. Over the last years, ACA has together worked with its members on introducing more ESG considerations. And I see you have the pin, wearing the pin, so this must be a question which is easy to you. ACA was already trying to introduce more ESG thinking in the daily business of their companies. Over the last year, we have done a scrutiny of our investment portfolio, as we are large institutional investors, to see if these investment portfolios are in line with the COP21 goal of global warming maximizing at 2 degrees maximum. So we are working on that topic. Do you have any thoughts and any recommendations to the sector on the topic of ESG?
Yes, ESG or green or sustainable finance is a key factor for the future. It's also one of the consequences of the pandemic, although it's not only due to that, but the pandemic reinforces the necessity to combat climate change. Let me say why I say so. When there was a lockdown, more or less, in most developed countries over the planet, in a couple of weeks, we've seen nature becoming cleaner. We've seen the water becoming transparent. We've seen a planet that is in better health. So for those who are climate skeptics, with all due respect, who have been telling us that the impact of human activity on the planet was minor and that such things happen anyway, we've had a test bed, a live proof that the human activity is a key factor in creating the global warming. So having seen that, we must react by doing even more than what we had intended to do before, and at the very least implement the Paris Accord. Now, seen from Luxembourg, even if Luxembourg reduces its CO2 emissions spectacularly, it will be a drop of water compared to the whole planet. But if we can leverage our financial sector, banks and insurance and fund industry together, leverage that financial sector to boost sustainable finance, there the impact of Luxembourg on climate change will be spectacular. And we are already one of the financial centers that is seen as most active in the field. We're ranked number 4 in Europe. Now, government can do a lot, but obviously the key is the private sector. So we have set up a framework back in September for sustainability bonds. It is the first of its kind in the world, and it entails already the latest developments at European level, as on that topic Europe has delivered extremely well. Last year we agreed on what is called taxonomy, which means what is green finance and what is not, to avoid greenwashing. And we have implemented all these principles and made it a reference, taking into account the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations, which I wear every day because I really think it is for me now a fil rouge in what I do as a finance minister. We have issued the first sustainability bond in September, and we saw that markets are really calling for such new sustainable bonds. It was oversubscribed more than 10 times, and I'm glad to say that the Luxembourg Green Exchange, which lists exclusively sustainable bonds, has a market share of more than 50% worldwide. And I would like also to underline that the euro is the main currency for sustainable bonds worldwide, as more than half of them are issued in euro. So we see Europe can position itself in this regard and make what can still be seen by some like a burden or a difficulty, make it something that will make a difference and make us ahead of the competition.
I think when I should describe to somebody who is our Prime Minister, I always say, as I said already beforehand, you're a very optimistic guy. You always see the glass half full. You said also that one of the fil rouge is all these topics about ESG. And I think one last thing you really are pushing or have been pushing over the last year is digitalization. So I know that you think that digitalization of the economy and the financial sector is a necessary condition for success. And I think the whole sector agrees on that. You have created some years ago the Luxembourgish House of Financial Technologies, the LOFT. And I think you're still chairing that organization since the beginning. So, Pierre, you must be very happy that ACA is launching or has launched this year for the first time the ACA FinTech Awards. And during the last 3 sessions we had, there were always 2 startups which were pitching their ideas, their innovative ideas, and they had to pitch in front of a jury who questions them, but also they were collecting votes of all those who were looking at them virtually, so which was very interesting. There were more than 600 voters every session. So just to recall what they were all speaking about and what they were proposing as innovative ideas, I would propose that we run a short video on the pitches they have done.
Very good.
So we also have the representatives of the 6 startups with us, not in live, social distancing is a rule, but via video conference. Hello to everybody.
Hello.
Hello. Hi, hello.
Hello.
Good evening.
Pierre, I always dreamed about one thing. If on a floor like this, to open an envelope and say, the winner is. Did you dream? Did you have the same dream?
I've had lots of dreams in my life, and most have been have come true.
You shouldn't tell them all of it.
No, I won't today. But I hadn't thought of this one. But I thank you for this opportunity.
Anyhow, I think the efforts which has been done by the 6 startups and the high level of participation we had from the public voting requires that the winner declaration has to be done by the most important person in the room, so by the Minister of Finance. So I leave it to you, Pierre.
Thank you.
There's the envelope.
Thank you
could
very
you
much.
reveal the winner?
So for those who see us from far, the most important person in the room, there's only 20 people here, so. But there's so many digitally with us. Okay. Okay. I can give already a little bit of a hint. There's an alliteration in the name of the company. So, the winner is active asset allocation. Congratulations.
Many thanks. C'est un honneur d'avoir gagné ce prix. Je suis très ému en tant qu'Active Asset Allocation et toute l'équipe. Je voulais remercier surtout la Loft, Nazir, Alex, Manon, Anthony, l'ACA pour avoir organisé ce superbe événement. C'est un des plus beaux qu'on a fait de manière digitale. Et on existe depuis 10 ans, donc on en a vu de se mettre en place, mais d'une si bonne qualité. Donc un grand bravo à toute l'équipe. La plateforme est superbe et on est heureux d'avoir ce prix au Luxembourg depuis qu'on est à la Loft et on espère avoir l'opportunité de repitcher à beaucoup plus d'assureurs qu'à l'heure actuelle.
Félicitations à vous pour avoir choisi un nom qui me plaît beaucoup parce que on dit omen, nomen, donc dans le nom de votre société, on reconnaît déjà ce que vous faites et puis en choisissant de faire une allitération puisque ça commence 3 fois par un A. Je trouve que c'est très habile. Ça fait triple A. C'est comme le Luxembourg. Bravo.
Exactement. Merci. Merci beaucoup.
So congratulations to you as a winner, but also thank you very much for everybody who has participated. I think your pitches were great. They were of very high quality, and ACA is very proud of having such a good panel of startups pitching, which shows also that the ACA Startup Award is something we should continue over the next years. So Pierre, let's turn now to the last session of tonight, our keynote speaker. The keynote speech is done by Alphonsus, friends call him Fons Trompenaars. Fons is born 1953 in Amsterdam and is a Dutch organizational theorist, not a terrorist, a theorist, management consultant and author in the field of cross-cultural communication. He studied economics at the Free University of Amsterdam and later earned a PhD from Wharton School, University of Pennsylvania, with a dissertation on differences in conception of organizational structure in various cultures. He himself experienced cultural differences firsthand at home, where he grew up speaking both French and Dutch, and then later working for Shell in 9 different countries. He is known all over the world for his work as a consultant, trainer, motivational speaker, and author of many books on the subject of culture and business. Fons was voted one of the top 20 HR most influential international thinkers by the HR magazine. He's also ranked in the Thinkers 50 to be one of the most influential management thinkers alive and shortlisted as making substantial strides in the contribution to the understanding of globalization and the new frontiers established by emerging markets. This sounds very technical, but Pierre, I listened to Fons last year. I thought what he was telling at that time was very enlightening, to me at least, but it was also something more. It was very fun. So, ladies and gentlemen, Fons Trompenaars, who's speaking to us tonight about how to lead from the front, reconciling strategic dilemmas. Ladies and gentlemen, Fons Trompenaars.
Wonderful. After such an introduction, it can only go downhill. We'll do that, but with a special purpose, because you can only go downhill when you once went uphill. And it's a thing I would like to discuss. In essence, that any value disconnected from its opposite leads to a pathology. So the long term without the short term is useless. It's daydreaming, and it's called vision. And some say with vision you need to go to an eye doctor. But I know people who execute without vision, and they're vulgarists, and both don't work. But that's true for any value. And it's interesting that our models are still very much bipolar. So if we take Myers-Briggs, the most used psychological test in the world, 3 million people fill it in yearly. If you score high on thinking, you score low on feeling. Now, I do a lot of work with MBAs in the Netherlands, better known as mediocre but arrogant. And it's wonderful because they are the icons of bipolar thinking. And I asked them, why would an organization centralize and why would an organization decentralize? And they immediately come with their answer. They say, you centralize for consistency, economies of scale, and you centralize for consistency and globalization, and you decentralize for flexibility, being close to the customer. And I said, oh, that's great, wonderful. But now I ask the same question, but first think. And most MBAs get nervous because normally that's not part of their education. Now, if you think about the question, and obviously I'm not interested in your answer, but I'll give you the answer. What I want to hear after this introduction is that the only reason for centralization is decentralization. Because there's nothing to centralize if you're not decentralized. Now, if you say this is a word game, let's take our human body. Is our human body centralized or decentralized? And we all know the answer is yes. We have centralized certain functions to allow for more decentralization. Now, why this introduction? Because we are facing a world that is more and more diverse, not in numbers, but in experience. So I live in Amsterdam, at least in the weekend, and it's wonderful because in Amsterdam, 53% of the people living there don't have Dutch parents. Now that's interesting. And we have models that are for Dutch people. And they say, oh, they need to adapt to the Dutch, while the majority is not. That's interesting. I was in Miami not long ago, and it had a sign, we speak English here, which was a surprise to me because I didn't hear any English. Now, that's where the world is going, but not only in terms of passport or language, it's also true for gender. We get more and more females in the workplace, very risky for men. And we have other generations that have something to say because of technology. And we have a diversity of diversity. And our models are very backwards because they're and culturally biased. So if you read leadership books written by Americans, you smell America. And that's called the revised edition. Because 10 years ago, the most quoted competence of a leader was, a good leader has courage. Today, it's caution. 5 years ago, it was vision. Today, it's execution. And the Americans have a tendency to oscillate from one extreme to the other. And you know what that means in politics. Now, let's take a French book on leadership, Les Grands Patrons. 3 characteristics of a good leader. Are you born in Paris? Are you male? And did you go to the École Polytechnique? Oh, Grand Patron, right? And we all know this. Now read a book on leadership by the Chinese. Yin, Yang, Mao, Fao, Tao. We know this. Our models are culturally biased, and the world is getting more diverse. That's one. And our models on top of that are bipolar. And that has led to quite some interesting companies that I would like to show you. By the way, I would love you to think about questions. So if there is a question, please make sure that you answer them. And then we will make sure that there are moments where I can respond to your questions. And secondly, if you like the slides, we'll make a copy available. And if you don't like them, you still get them. Now, let me get into the first slide, if it works. Good. Yeah, and can we have, here we go. These are the companies we have created, and sorry if your organization is not there. And those are the organizations we created with bipolar thinking and cultural bias. So what is the alternative? The alternative is what Einstein said. You can't solve a problem at the same level it was created. Now that's interesting. So we have a financial crisis in Europe, and we asked the Germans to solve it. Now, that's not what Einstein meant. Einstein meant you have to go one level higher. Now, what are ways of doing that? First of all, innovation. We have, secondly, sustainability, globalization, and leadership. Let me connect those four in one sentence. It will be a German sentence, but I'll stop after 400 words. A great leader connects different viewpoints that are created by globalization, which is another word for innovation that leads to sustainable results. So leadership is about connecting opposites, which is very normal in a global type of environment. And the connection process end result is innovation, leading to sustainable results. But we need to change our models. Now, let us give you the alternative. So the old model, even in cultural studies, is are you German, a rectangle, or are you Italian, an ellipse? And what Einstein is saying, look at the world as a cylinder. So culture is perhaps regional, while the cylinder that unites the opposites is humanity. And the spiral reflects the idea of reconciliation. It's a dance between opposites. By the way, final little point, not everything is a dilemma. There are things where you have to make choices when the ellipse is more useful than the rectangle. But in most cases, the long term is not more important than the short term. You need both. And global is not important than local, but you need both. Then it's a dilemma. But if you are in safety management, you say no, safety needs the same rules, so we have to globalize the rule. And I don't want local deviations. So a good leader separates a problem from a dilemma and then unites them on a higher level. Now this leads to a wonderful point, and that is called creating wealth or innovation. Innovation is combining values that you never thought could be joined, therefore scarce, therefore profitable. So if we take Apple, Apple has combined aesthetics with functionality. Every beautiful aspect of, let's say, the iPhone or an iPad, because it doesn't have a frame, is functional because you don't break your nails while swiping it. So beauty has become functional. Let's take Formula One. What is the big dilemma in Formula One? Speed and safety. Now, in the car industry, they separate the two, and they throw the end result over the wall. Now make it safe. In Formula One, every engineer says, how can we use the speed of the car to make it more safe? And that is wonderful, that is called aerodynamics, that the faster you go, the more downforce you have. It needs another mindset. Now, what is the alternative to leadership? We have done a lot of research. Successful leaders separate a problem from a dilemma, and if it's a dilemma, they reconcile it and they create the cylinder out of the rectangle and the ellipse. Now, I would like to give you a model where you say, hey, wow, that's helpful. If you are in an organization, and for example, you are a risk manager, not about risk avoidance, that's easy, you just stay in your bed. But risk management, you first need to know what are the dilemmas that needs my management to be more effective. So you need to recognize those differences. And I'll give you a cultural model that explains those differences. We call them 7 meta-dilemmas. Then respect the end result, because very many cultural models lead to, hey, one side or the other side, and they stereotype the other and then add to it, it's bad. Respect means, and it's very easy to find, that all the dilemmas in the world are in yourself, but we have pushed some aside. And I'll give you examples of that in a second so you can live it. And then once you respect the differences, you need to reconcile them. The art of finding synthesis out of thesis and antithesis. And then finally, realize, what can I do as a leader to make this happen? Now, this is my introduction, and I would like to see, if you see some of the recent research we did in the pandemic that we're living at the moment, what were the 7 top dilemmas that we found in our research in 22 countries. And the interesting thing is that all the countries have the same dilemmas, but their approaches are quite different. So it's compliance versus flexibility. It's taking tough decisions, treating your staff fairly, rapport and rapport, etc., etc. Obviously, face-to-face versus digital. Now, if you don't see it as a dilemma, you're in trouble. Because digital without face-to-face is a pathology. By the way, today, face-to-face without digital is a pathology. So the question is, how can you combine? And that's what I would like to do now. But I'll give you a moment to ask questions, because my introduction says, if I summarize it, there is a world where you see getting more and more diverse. Our models suck. They are bipolar and culturally biased. And what we need is the alternative in finding reconciliations between opposites. And if you do that, you're in great shape. And the pandemic is just, I'm listening to television, talk shows, and then you have one side of the dilemma shouting, and then the others shouting even louder. So you have the hospital director saying, it's all about health, and then you have the economist saying, yeah, but our economy, yes, we know. And we need a dilemma reconciling mindset by asking the question, what can I do with the economy that helps our health? And what can I do with our health approach that helps our economy to survive? Rather than two people shouting louder. Now, that is something that I would like to ask you. Is that introduction clear? Are there any questions? And did some questions come in? Because I was amazingly clear this evening. Is it okay for the moment? Then we'll go on. But please, put your little wonderful questions in the chat box and let me know what is bothering you. Even people who disagree, I would love it, okay? Because I will say, that's a nice viewpoint. What about the opposite? So we'll apply dilemma reconciliation with your opposition. Now, let's look at what is culture. I would like you to think about what are the first words coming to your mind when you think about culture. And why culture? Because culture, being it gender, generation, passport, I don't mind, gives you the dilemmas. On the one hand, on the other hand. Now, let me give you a title of a book. And the title is The 190 Definitions of Culture. It was written 40 years ago by Kroeber and Kluckhohn. And that was 40 years ago, so I'm sure there are 191 today. Ed Schein summarized the idea of culture. He says, culture is like an onion. On the outside, we have the expressions of culture, the language we speak, the food we eat, the way we meet. But be careful, we might eat a hamburger for different reasons. So you have to go beyond the artifacts and products and hit the level of norms and values. And the most used definition of culture is a shared system of norms and values. In a nutshell, values are shared orientations of what we define as what we like to do, and norms are things, orientations of what we should do. When the value becomes a norm, in other words, we start liking what we should do, it slips out of consciousness and becomes a basic assumption. A basic assumption you don't even realize yourself unless you have culture shock, because it's the unquestioned reality, and that is implicit. And I would like to discuss what are the dilemmas created by our own basic assumptions, and then what are ways to reconcile it, because that's what great leaders do. Now, I would like to give you a little model that I developed indeed at Wharton in 79, between 79 and 82. And I looked at all the literature, and in fact, we came up with 7 dimensions, 5 in the area of human relationships, and then time and nature. Let me give you one example, and I invite you also to do some voting. So be very ready for it. And it's the first of the 7, and that is rules versus exceptions, or in more academic terms, universalism versus particularism. And if you like, one of my dilemmas that I just quoted, compliance versus flexibility. So we have done now 40 years of research, 150,000 people filled in our questionnaire. And the first question was, you're riding in a car driven by a close friend of yours. Your friend is speeding, going 50 kilometers an hour where you're allowed to go 30. And your friend hits a pedestrian. You come to court and the lawyer of your friend says, don't worry, you're the only witness. 2 questions. First of all, and be careful, I want your answer, and that is, my friend has A, a definite right to expect my help by lying, B, some right, and C, my friend has no right to expect me to lie. Now, I would like to go to the polling, and please fill in what you think is the proper answer. And be careful, it's not anonymous. Okay? Now, you have filled this in, at least many of you. And what we see is that answer C is the highest, 50%. Well, please go on, huh? Please go on. Now it's 60%. I'll give you half a minute more. Don't think too much about it. What is the right of your friend to expect you to lie? Definite right A, some right B, no right C. Okay? Now we do this also to ask you another question. Was this an easy one? Now I've done this work in South Korea, in Nigeria, only once by the way, Amsterdam, New York, and I've never had a participant that said this was a nice situation to be in. The point I'm trying to make, there is nobody in the world that don't think this is a dilemma. Everyone in the world has both values in yourself. Namely, we all want to help friends, and at the same time, we all have something with the truth. So the dilemma is human, and our approach to the dilemma is cultural, because if I give you the results, now here, we see 63% said C, 21% B, and because you think we didn't look at your email address, 16% said A. Now the second question was, and would you now help your friend by lying or not? Okay, so the dilemma is human, and we see very soon that the approach to it is cultural. Have a look. We will see that this is a dilemma that is called universal versus particular. On the universalistic side, we have people who say, my friend has no right or some right and I will not help. And on the particularistic side, there are people who say, what happened to the friend? What happened to the pedestrian? The best question I ever had was an Italian asking, what happened to the car? Yeah, there are important things in life. So you see the tension in all of us, but it's our culture that guides us. Now, we know the differences, but, you know, the latest fashion from America is that suddenly companies need values. And those who are most eager to write them down on a folder, I know exactly what their problems are. So 80% in America have integrity as a value of their company. Yeah, like I have 3 daughters, and in Amsterdam we have a sign on top of our door which says, we don't kill men here. Because it's one of our values, but it makes our guests nervous. Why would they put it there? By the way, it's a shame for business that they have to write down they have integrity, right? So, another one-liner. The value of a value is, does it help you to reconcile your dilemma? So, I was with a big American company in finance, and they obviously had #1 integrity as a value, yeah, because they didn't have it. And I said, how does integrity help you to make the correct answer to the car accident dilemma? And there was an American who stood up, Mr. Trompenaars, I lost you. How can you have integrity if you lie, even if it's for a friend? And by the way, he said, a good friend would never ask that from me. There was a Korean in the room who said, John, I disagree. How can you have integrity if you don't help your friend? And all 40 people, representing 30 countries, understood both. Because it's a dilemma, but you realize that culture killed half of you in crucial situations. Now, I chose this company because they had a second value, obviously another problem. We respect the culture of others. I said, this will be a nice afternoon. Now, have a thought. Suppose these are your 2 values, and my question is at the bottom. in the context of these two values, what would your answer be? If you are in a multicultural group, amongst Americans, no problem. Amongst Koreans, no problem. But you're now you're in Amsterdam. And people say, what the hell is this? And this is what I learned in Japan. In Japan, they said, Mr. Trompenaars, our answer is not on your list. In Japan, we would test the strength of our friendship by asking our friend to tell the truth in court himself, so we can talk to the judge to lower the sentence for his courage. And what I liked of this answer is that instead of choosing between a friend and the truth, which is obviously a bipolar scale, you connect the truth to the friend. That's reconciliation. And that's the essence of the word integrity. If you look it up etymologically, integrity is creating wholeness through the integration of opposites. And that is the end result of a dilemma reconciled. Let's practice this now 5 times with dilemmas you will recognize. Now, first of all, universalism is about consistency, systems, procedures, you know, this latest invention of transparency. So you can say to your wife the next morning, honey, without makeup, you're really ugly, yeah? What? Transparency, new fashion. Any value disconnected from its opposite leads to a pathology. You have to become English and say, you have an interesting face in the morning. Now, the opposite is the particularist. Be flexible, pragmatic, and what have you. It depends. What is better? Connect. Now, look at our research and shows, obviously, number 1 is Switzerland. 94% said, my friend has no right or some right, and I will not help. And you see all the Protestants are at the top. Netherlands, Australia, Norway, Denmark, because they've seen the light. God has seen it. The risk, if I would stop here, is that the people at the top would say, Mr. Trompenaars, thank you. Mozambique, Argentina, India, Morocco at the bottom. You can't trust them. They always help their friends. They're corrupt. I did a workshop in China, and a Chinese came to me and said, Mr. Trompenaars, I knew the Americans are corrupt, and you proved it. I said, what do you mean? You can't trust them. They won't even help their friends. So what do you want to be corrupted by? Now, that's the dilemma between universal and particular. How to reconcile it? Have a look at rules versus exceptions. Globalization, do you need global standards? Or do you want to go to cultural diversity and respect the different cultures? Crack the line. What I'm doing with you is crack the line. That's what great leaders do. And exaggerate the extremes. This is called the global cooperation, and the rest of the world is called ROW. You have the multi-local cooperation, is everybody dances around one logo. Be careful for the compromise, the Statue of Liberty with the local flag. It's called the international cooperation. What we need to become is the transcultural cooperation. The transcultural cooperation has 4 main characteristics. They share values, but the values are like yin and yang. We strive for teams that consist of creative individuals. We give people direct feedback with diplomacy. Second characteristic, it's polycentric. Third characteristic, it has a wonderful world of keen interest for local best practices, which they then globalize. And finally, they share a leadership model, which we will call later servant leadership. So you see where I am? The world is getting more diverse. We have more and more dilemmas. And we need a model that reconciles them on a higher level. Now, organizational culture is another level. Look at my definition of organizational culture, which I think is great, and especially because it's mine. Now, organizational culture is the end result of competing values fighting for preference. Any organization has dilemmas like compliance and flexibility, push versus pull, long-term versus short-term. And any organization that overdo one value with the other runs a risk. Now, let's look at what are these typical ones. So we have an instrument that measures this, and we have on the top right-hand corner the combination of egalitarian and task orientation. On the bottom right-hand corner, we call it the Eiffel Tower, a task orientation combined with hierarchy, etc. And they are all opposites. And any surviving system will need to deal effectively with those opposites. And I'll give you examples now. Short-term performance, goal orientation, strategic focus is the task-oriented one. We have the Eiffel Tower, structures, procedures, efficiency. You need them as well. We have the family culture, bottom left, sustainable relationships, effective teamwork, organizational commitment, and finally, the creative side, which we call the incubator, top left-hand corner, change, flexibility, customer focus, and personal growth. Any highly motivated and performing organization combines those, and it's loaded with dilemmas, like the first one that we said is risk management. The risk of a culture is defined by one value dominating its opposite. Have a look. We have rules versus exceptions. If your rules, your structures are more important than change and flexibility, you're a bureaucracy and it doesn't work. Another one is increased focus on achieving goals versus involving people for consensus. And that is something that I would like to give you as an example. And it's the most quoted cultural differences. Are you rather individualistic or are you rather communitarian? An individualistic culture on A would say, give people as much freedom as possible, and then Adam Smith will take care of the rest. B, no, you have to continuously look after each other, even if it obstructs individual freedom. That's communitarian. Have a look. Now we have taken the same database, but looked at age. Wow. And you see, for 150,000 people, that younger people tend to be much more individualistic than older people, worldwide. And you see that now with the pandemic. The individual is saying, you know, I can't get ill, I'm young. But have you ever thought about somebody else in your collectivity? Yeah, tomorrow, but not today. And the older worrying about group solidarity. Now, is this an implicit hint, this is bad or good? No, it's a dilemma. Now, let me give you a little case. I was working 9 years with Shell, and we had a joint venture between the Japanese and a group in Wavre, not far from here in Belgium, with Northwest Europeans and Americans. And after half a year, the Japanese were complaining about everything is focused on the individual here. The bonus, performance management, it's all about the individual. We had a dilemma, namely, on the one hand, we need to reward individual performance. On the other hand, we need to stimulate team cooperation. So crack the line, exaggerate the extremes, the pathologies. Me, myself, and withholding information. The big problem of individualized bonus systems is I don't share my information. Let's take the opposite. Ask the Japanese, what is the problem of teamwork? It leads to mediocrity. Nobody dares to stick out their neck. So let's go for the compromise. Let's go for the small team so you piss off all. What we did in Shell, we said, why don't we give 50% of the variable pay to individuals under one criterion? Who's the best team player? And the other 50% of the variable pay will go to teams on the basis of what they can show they have done to increase individual creativity. That's reconciliation. You motivate individuals to become better team players. You motivate teams for individual creativity. Every father or mother knows what I'm talking about. Now, this in the literature is called co-opetition. And co-opetition is you individually compete to better cooperate. You cooperate to have individuals better compete. Now, another one, and it's my favorite and my last in depth, specificity versus diffuseness. So have a look. This is called specific versus diffuse, or if you like, analytic versus holistic. This is the work of Kurt Lewin. Kurt Lewin was a German who went to America and became world famous as a psychologist. He said, Americans are amazing people because you hardly know them and they talk to you. Why? Because they're like peaches. Their privacy in the center is small and they have a big public flesh that is easily accessible. We Germans are like coconuts, very difficult to enter, but once you're in, it's very soft. Now, the U type, the American type, according to Lewin, is small privacy, big public life. I don't know if you know to live in America. I did for a couple of years. And the first thing I realized, before you hardly know people, they're in your refrigerator. A refrigerator for Americans is public. The car, you need my car? Take my car, no problem. Have you tried this in Germany? Oh, you kidding? He's my wife, but leave my car, okay? There is furniture. In America, they move, they leave their furniture. Have you tried this in France? It's called antique. You keep it to yourself, it's very private. Now, according to Lewin, this leads to a specific relationship. If I relate to you and you relate to me, cut the crap, what is this about? Even when I got my PhD, suddenly they called me Dr. Trompenaars at the university. But I had a barbecue party to celebrate my dissertation, and they called me Fons. So you're Fons at the barbecue and doctor at the university. That's quite different from the German model. In Germany, Austria, you're a hair doctor everywhere. You're a hair doctor at the barbecue, you're a hair doctor at the university. You come home and say, "Guten Abend, Frau Doctor." Where are the little doctors? Everything is doctor. Why? Because it's not specific. That's why initially there's no relationship. But around October, Munich, this happens. Everything is mixed. Now, the big problem in international business is where the specific meets the diffuse. Specific cultures like the Dutch, you can recognize them, very straightforward in their communication. Already in Belgium, you get more of the coconut, like, don't mess with me. So what is private for the Belgian is public for the Dutch. And it creates all kinds of misery. Now, what does this mean in the dilemmas like digital versus analog? Digital is specific, analog is diffuse. And we call that high-tech versus high-touch. Crack the line. If you only go for the electronic hook, be careful. You miss a lot of the personality, as banks are finding out. If you only go for the person in all his or her problems, you get the expensive, slow, and customized relationship. What you need to have is a combination. And it's not a compromise. It's asking the question, what can I do digitally that helps us to deepen the relationship? And what can I do with the intimacy I have with the client to help them to use digital better? And this is an example. It's wonderful to be here because there are people I talk to rather than a screen. It's the beginning of analog combined with digital. And there are many ways, and that's the way to go, rather than, oh, everything needs to be digital. Are you kidding? Like, not everything needs to be analog. But we are now feeling the pathologies. I would like to end up with 2 more examples and then leave you with some questions or perhaps answers. The next dilemma is one about leadership. In every culture, there is a dilemma between output, oh, he did or she did a great job, that you're doing. But there is also, what is the background of the person? Who are you, like in most of Asia? Now, what do you do if you go international? What is a leadership model that works everywhere? Now, crack the line. Is your status based on your performance, or is it attributed to seniority or role? Okay, let's have a look. This is a book with the subtitle, The Dutch and Swedish Disease. It's called Lost Democratic Leadership. You can have too much democracy. You involve everybody, it takes too long, and leaders are seen as weak people. They never take a decision. Now, we have seen in the Middle East what happens if you don't get feedback. Follow the leader, and you all drop down the cliff. There are few models that work in every culture. The servant leader. Now, the servant leader is a person who holds the ladder for others to climb. It's not a weak person. All the icons of politics that we all admire, like the Mandelas, the Gandhis, are servant leaders. All the icons in religion are servant leaders, from Jesus Christ to Mohammed to Buddha. They did something for their communities. 29 or 7 years of jail, and instead of saying, let's kill these bloody whites, what did Mandela say? How can I help South Africa? Okay? Now, there was a story that Jesus was walking on a road, and he sees a man crying. He says, what's the matter? He says, I'm blind. He says, open your eyes and see. And Jesus happy, the man happy, another miracle. He goes on, sees a female crying. What's the matter? I can't walk. Stand up and walk. Jesus happy, and the woman happy. And he goes on, another man sitting there. He says, what's the matter? He says, I'm Dutch. And Jesus said next to him, both cried. And so there are limitations to servant leadership. You might ask, but how can I create a servant leader? Motorola, when they were at the top of their reign, had a fantastic CEO, Bob Galvin, who introduced a system where every boss had to talk to their subordinates 4 times a year with 5 questions where the answer is yes or no. Are the working you're doing for Motorola meaningful to you? Yes or no? Yes. Good. Next question. Do you have enough resources to do your task properly? No. Then it was the responsibility of the boss to make it a yes. Next version. That's servant leadership. Namely, that you have a system where you as a leader, either by push rather than pull, need to help your people to make it into a yes. See what happens. I come to the last bunch of slides, the servant leader. Now, what do we do with time? Look at the minimal viable product. Do you focus on planning and optimization? That's called aim, 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 and forget to shoot. That's the perfect product launched too late. But if you go rapid, you do something like shoot, shoot, shoot. Oh, I forgot. And then aim. Let's go now, the minimal viable product. You launch the product as soon as you think it can survive, but it's open for learning as fast as you can. So short term is combined with long term. So many successful products are reconciling opposites. The last one, I would like to invite you, internal versus external control. Are you the boxer or are you the judo player? Let's have a look. I would like you to vote for yourself. What happens to me is my own doing versus sometimes I feel I do not have enough control over the direction my life is taken. So please, let's go to the voting. Not more than half a minute, this is easy. A or B? You're doing well. It's 50-50 now, be careful. Now I see that in the insurance industry, we are against 70 to 30. More or less, it goes up and down. But in view of time, we get a sense. But it's, again, sometimes it's A, sometimes it's B. It's a dilemma. How can we reconcile this? Let's look at another snapshot of our database, 150,000 people. Israel, Norway, USA. But also surprises like Brazil. I'm not surprised by France, by the way. The French think they can control the world. And as you know, they only need one person to hold a light bulb because they think the world is turning around them. Now, we see China and Venezuela, Russia. Let's wait and see. So what is stronger? Let's have the last dilemma, and that is abstract. So what I was trying to tell you, and I now have my summary. A dilemma comes from the Greek, and it just means 2 propositions that are positive, by the way. A dilemma is not a positive versus a negative. Global is as okay as local. Individual creativity is as okay as teamwork, but they might bite. And what we need is never compromise, crack the line, and try to reconcile it on a higher level. Now, physically, my last example, I was with a small little bank in Japan. And HSBC is the name. And there were sales and marketing people and said, we have a logo. Under the logo it says the world's local bank. And we had a workshop around a dilemma, namely global versus local. And I asked the Japanese, what is your latest problem? And they said, Our latest problem is the Americans telling us that we're going towards a crisis because everything is subjective here. We have networks of people we know. We need to be more objective. And we say, hi, 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 which means we don't get a clue of what you're saying. So they said it again, but louder. And they found out they didn't have a word that captured objectivity. The word that came closest was kyakanteki, which means the outsider's viewpoint. For the cynical Japanese, the viewpoint of the American is objective. Shukanteki is the insider's viewpoint. And we came with the following, we had a cartoonist, and this was the output of one. So is this what is this? What dilemma? And they said, because we started with the reconciliation, and that's the Japanese garden. This is the top view of the bridge and the side view of the bridge. And that combines objectivity with subjectivity. And lo and behold, I come on Heathrow 3 months later. They took the idea of the Japanese garden and they launched the most successful international advertising campaign ever. You remember this one? Work, play. Play, work. It depends on your viewpoint. I would like to stop here. The point is, we are a world that is loaded with dilemmas. Look at the pandemic. What we need is a model that asks the question, what can I do with value A that helps us with value B? Then we're in great shape. I thank you. And if there are questions that are burning, you may. But I think, again, that it was a pleasure to be here. And if there are questions that are burning for a later time, email us. I'll hope I can react on it. But is there a time perhaps for 1 or 2 burning questions? Good. Thank you so much for your time. And I'll see you later.
Nous arrivons au terme de la séance académique de l'ACA Insurance Day 2020. C'est une édition très spéciale. En mars dernier, le monde a changé brutalement. Nous avons décidé avec mon équipe de maintenir l'événement phare de l'assurance au Luxembourg et d'en faire un événement aussi qualitatif que les 7 éditions précédentes. En tenant bien sûr compte des nouvelles contraintes et toutes les incertitudes. Ce que vous avez vu aujourd'hui, ainsi que le 9, le 12 et le 19 novembre, c'est le résultat de 8 semaines de travail acharné. Cet événement est une formidable aventure humaine parce que vous êtes venus à ce rendez-vous. Et je tiens à remercier ici tout particulièrement nos intervenants de ce soir, celles et ceux du 9, du 12 et du 19 novembre. Nos 33 sponsors sans lesquels il n'aurait pas été possible d'organiser l'ACA Insurance Day 2020. Mon équipe dynamique qui n'a pas ménagé ses efforts et les professionnels qui les ont accompagnés. Et pour terminer, vous qui avez partagé ce moment avec nous derrière votre écran. Nous espérons que ces 8 heures de programme pour les plus assidus parmi vous vous ont plu et vous ont permis d'entrevoir le monde d'après pour l'assurance, c'est-à-dire une nouvelle réalité avec le travail qui investit l'espace domestique, mais aussi les différentes dimensions de notre existence depuis que celle-ci se fait par écran interposé. À présent, je vous donne rendez-vous pour l'ACA Insurance Day 2021, le jeudi 25 novembre 2021, ici au centre de conférence à Luxembourg, avec un programme digital, mais surtout en espérant pouvoir vous y rencontrer de nouveau et vous accueillir de nouveau. Nous sommes seuls ici. Merci, bonne soirée et surtout, prenez soin de vous.